Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at Napoleon Bonaparte, the tragic arc of ambition. We're tracing the life of a boy who grew up to change Europe forever. It's a breathtaking story of how sheer willpower can build an empire, and how that exact same unchecked drive can tear it all down. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The year was 1769. We're starting far from the grand palaces of Paris, out on the rugged Mediterranean island of Corsica, which, surprisingly, had only just become a French territory the year before. A boy is born into a very modest family, and I mean absolutely no one could have predicted the massive impact he was about to have on the world stage. Chapter 1. The Unstoppable Rise, from 1769 to 1804.
Born in 1769, Napoleon didn't waste any time. By the time the French Revolution broke out, he was already making a name for himself as a brilliant military commander. And you might be wondering, what made him so unstoppable? Well, it was this potent mix of raw intelligence, burning ambition, and totally fearless leadership. It paid off because by 1804, he achieved the unthinkable and was actually crowned Emperor of France.
And when he took that title, he essentially declared that his destiny was in his own hands. He meant that quite literally, too. During his coronation, he famously took the crown right out of the Pope's hands and crowned himself. It really set the tone for his entire rule, establishing this recurring theme that he and he alone was in control of his fate.
Chapter 2. The Peak of Power.
So what did that absolute peak actually look like? Well, enter the Battle of Austerlitz. This wasn't just a win. We're talking about a tactical masterpiece. Napoleon intentionally weakened his own right flank just to trick the combined armies of Austria and Russia into attacking. And then, he completely trapped and crushed them. Just grasp the sheer scale of that for a second. He took on two major world powers simultaneously and completely outsmarted them both.
Chapter 3. Ambition and the Fall.
But ambition has its limits. Let that sink in for a moment. For a man who firmly believed his destiny was entirely in his own hands, this was a massive, sobering reality check. Because right here is where our story drastically shifts gears from a triumphant march to an absolute tragedy.
In 1812, Napoleon marched into the invasion of Russia with an absolutely staggering force, 600,000 men. Keep that massive number in your head. It's crucial, because what happens next makes the ensuing destruction feel incredibly, devastatingly impactful.
So what exactly happened to those 600,000 men? Well, first, nature itself turned against them when a brutal, freezing Russian winter set in. Second, with supply lines stretched incredibly thin, starvation just decimated the troops. And finally, constant guerrilla attacks systematically destroyed what was left of his shattered, retreating army. Only a tiny fraction ever made it back home. This was the exact moment where history, and frankly nature, took destiny right out of his hands.
It's crazy when you think about how fast it all unraveled. At his zenith, his empire was the dominant power, stretching massively all the way from Spain to Poland. But sensing his fatal weakness after that disaster in Russia, his enemies finally united against him. After one last desperate attempt to reclaim his glory, it all ended in a crushing, final collapse at Waterloo in 1815.
Which brings us to the end of the man himself. 1821, death in exile on the remote island of St. Helena. Think about how incredibly far he fell. The guy went from ruling an entire continent to taking his final breaths on a tiny windswept rock out in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, constantly guarded by British warships.
Chapter 4. A Controversial Legacy.
So, why are we still talking about a man who died 2 centuries ago? Because while his physical empire collapsed, his impact never really disappeared. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what survived that downfall. His military strategies are still studied by generals today, but even more importantly, his Napoleonic Code fundamentally reshaped legal systems worldwide. In fact, places from Europe all the way to Louisiana still base their laws on it right now. These are the tangible things that outlive the emperor.
So I want to leave you with this question to ponder. Is a legacy built on such brilliant yet destructive ambition something to be admired or warned against? Napoleon Bonaparte remains one of history's most fascinating paradoxes, for sure. As you reflect on his story, I really encourage you to think about the true cost of unchecked ambition. Thanks for exploring this incredible life with me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world today.